Hello, brothers and sisters, friends around the world. My name is Vince Gelman. Thank you for joining me today. So as tyranny grows on the planet, as the totalitarian takeover continues to escalate, there's something that I keep hearing. There's something that I keep hearing that I need to speak to, that I take issue with, and that I have a different view on. And I feel that it deserves to be spoken about. And so that's why I'm creating this video. So what I have heard people say is that every tyranny going back in history happened because the public allowed it to happen. Because the public allowed it to happen. Because we allowed it to happen. It's ultimately we who is responsible. Now, in the spirit of not being black and white, because if you know my work, I do not like to be black and white because life is too infinitely complex to simplify things to black and white. I'm not going to say that throughout history, there hasn't been times when people have simply allowed things to happen and they gave up their responsibility, their social responsibility, their responsibility to their children, their responsibility to their community, their responsibility to their own heart integrity. They gave that up. They gave up who they are to power. There has absolutely been cases where people compromised who they are and didn't act on courage to stand up to tyranny. But there are some times in history where tyranny was simply too overpowering to stop. And in one point in history that I want to speak to is Nazi Germany. So when I hear people say that every tyranny happened because we allowed it to happen, I encourage us, and the purpose of this video is to consider more gray language, to not simply go to black and white. And here's the question I want to propose to you. How able were our brothers and sisters, our family, our ancestors, our soul family back then, how able were they to stop that tide of tyranny from happening? How able were they to not allow it to happen? How resourced were they? Resource can be looked upon within different contexts. There's resourced in terms of how much information they had. How much information they had to reduce the possibility that they were going to be under mind control, under extreme manipulation, under a hypnotic state. How much alternative information that they have outside of the propaganda machine. How able were they to organize with other people, band with other people? How able were they able to find those people? People who also felt a need to resist tyranny, to speak truth to power. How able were they to mobilize and organize themselves when they didn't have Zoom, they didn't have social media, they didn't have email, and maybe they didn't have phone. There's a good chance they didn't. Maybe they didn't have the ability to reach other people. Maybe they were extremely isolated and terrified as tanks started rolling down the streets, soldiers started marching down the streets and banging on doors. And we can also look at the context of resourced in terms of how resourced were they internally in their own nervous system. How able were they to center themselves, to regulate their nervous system, to calm themselves down? Did they have a spiritual practice? Did they have a yoga practice? Did they have a meditation practice? Did they have an altar that they sat next to? The reason why I say these spiritual things, meditation, yoga, I'm obviously being tongue-in-cheek a little bit here, because look at what's happening today. Look at what's happening today. Look at what's happening in our new age community. People who have done years of inner work, who have gone to this retreat and that meditation center and have a daily practice at home and drink their green smoothies and sing kirtan and have a guru and gone to this personal growth course and this personal growth course and gone to their breathwork classes and have drank ayahuasca and worked with mushrooms. And yet how many of those people who've done years and years of work have blindly handed themselves over to tyranny today in the last 2 years and have handed their children over as well? These people who are apparently awake. We have millions of people, even well-known spiritual teachers, who are completely bought in to the dark agenda. They are blindly supporting it. And they have access to alternative media. They can go online and they can research the data on excess deaths, the data that shows that there is a growing number of stillborns, a growing number of newborn deaths. The hypocrisies that are obviously there that can be easily seen. The announcement at the European Parliament recently that stated that the vaccine had not been tested for transmissibility prior to rollout. The information is there. So the information is there. They have the mediums to reach that. Go on YouTube. They've done years and years of work. But they're still handing themselves over to tyranny, and they're handing their children over to tyranny. And we're going to point to people during the Nazi regime who had not done their healing work. Very few of them had. Many of them were carrying ancestral trauma, unprocessed ancestral trauma from their father fighting in World War I. Didn't have the capacity to mobilize, to access all alternative information. The Nazi regime had a firm control of the propaganda. How are they going to get the information? By people handing out flyers? How effective is that? And we're going to say that they allowed it to happen? Are you kidding me? Remember, I'm not going to go to black and white. What I'm asking, this is the question, is how able were they to not allow it to happen? How able were they to not allow it to happen? How resourced were they in terms of information, in terms of mobilizing, in terms of their own nervous system, their own heart, their own centeredness? It is absolutely, to me, disrespectful to just jump to black and white conclusions and say, you know what, you allowed that to happen. And now where else can we apply this? Can we apply this to Mao China, to Pol Pot Cambodia? Can we apply this to Stalin Russia, Francisco Franco Spain? Can we go further back in time? Again, I'm not saying that there haven't been capacities, there haven't been awareness, there hasn't been the ability to stand up to tyranny and to make an empowering choice. But what I want to say to you is that it takes a very conscious, courageous, advanced soul to truly stand up to tyranny. It takes an advanced soul who is so exalted in their spiritual awareness to be absolutely uncompromising in truth. It is the brightest soul. It's the great luminaries, the great avatars of our time who don't compromise themselves and who are willing to die on the cross for it, who are willing to be killed, who are willing to be persecuted, who are willing to be tortured Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Jesus. How many are there who they're such powerful souls, and powerful souls make great sacrifices. They make great sacrifices. They won't sacrifice truth, but they will sacrifice a lot of the good things that we enjoy, our freedoms or various levels of freedoms, to be a leader. How many times was Gandhi sent to prison? Or they sacrificed their life ultimately because they come with such an exalted consciousness, and it is impossible for them in their Christ, in their Buddha consciousness, it is impossible for them to step away from that and tilt over towards tyranny and give themselves over to tyranny, to lose themselves to darkness. And so that is one way of understanding why people don't stand up. It's because they're just not at a place where they can do it. They don't have that willingness, that courage, that spiritual awareness. But that is not the whole picture. It's the other things I spoke about as well. But I want to offer something else to you. And that is, who are we to assume what their life was supposed to look like? We have an assumption that is something they should have done, that was part of their life path, was to stand up to tyranny. Maybe not. Maybe they came here to suffer through tyranny, and that is something they chose to experience. They wanted to have that experience of suffering as a soul. They wanted to come in and say, and they want to have that experience of suffering. They want to give themselves that crucible. They knew it was going to be hot, a hot crucible. But what happens in a crucible? Well, alchemy, transmutation, carbon gets transmuted into diamond, base metal into gold. Sometimes souls choose very hot crucibles so they can burn out a lot of karma, so they can clear a lot of karma. They choose difficult lives, very difficult lives, so that they can end long-standing patterns that they've carried through many lifetimes, so they can clear a heavy amount of karma that wouldn't happen if they settled into an easy path. How does that feel when I say that to you? That maybe it wasn't about standing up to tyranny, but experiencing it, suffering through it, learning through it. What might I learn about myself, about light, about dark, about life, if I give myself to a very dark passage? We don't come here, everyone, to avoid suffering. We don't come here to avoid suffering. We actually come here to experience suffering to various degrees. If we came here to avoid suffering, then why the heck would souls choose to incarnate into highly toxic homes? Do you believe that we just randomly show up in a mother's womb? It's just, there we go. It's just boom. Here we have a child in us, and it's just all biology. It's all random biology. Do you think we live in an accidental universe? Do you think we live in a random universe? Do you think that it is not an organized intelligence? It's not a perfect system? If you think that we live in a random universe and that we do not choose our parents as souls, then you might think I'm insane. But I know in my heart we choose our parents. So why would a soul incarnate into a family where there was a high probability, if not a certainty, that they were going to be sexually abused by their drunken father. Why would a soul choose to incarnate into a family if there was going to be a high probability or a certainty that they were going to experience extreme neglect? Why would they choose to incarnate into a family with a dysfunctional grandfather, grandmother, aunt, uncle who would be hovering around? An abusive sibling. Why would they incarnate into a toxic part of a city, a run-down part of a city, a gang-ridden part of a city? Why would they choose to incarnate in North Korea when at age 5, they're now working in the mines? Why would they choose to be born as a girl in Egypt when they're going to have genital mutilation? When I was a somatic therapist, something that I would say to my clients, a client would be sitting on the couch in front of me and she'd be sharing something devastating that happened to her when she was a child. And I would say to her this: no child should have to go through that. No child should have to experience that. And when I said that to my client, it always made them feel better. It was compassionate. But is it the truth? No child should have to go through that. Is that the truth? When a soul is coming in with a certainty, not a probability, a certainty that they are going to be sexually abused. Souls are coming in now, willing to give themselves to that experience. And here I am telling my clients, no child should ever have to go through what you experienced. Does this mean that I support child abuse? Absolutely not. Check out my other videos. I'm a fierce advocate for children. I absolutely do not support child abuse in the same way I do not support child neglect. It was not true to say that no child should have to go through this when souls are coming in, choosing that experience. Unless you believe that if a soul comes in, everything is probability and there's no certainties. Everything is only probability. No, there are some certainties, such as there's the certainty that you're going to meet a particular soul at a particular time, or you may have a particular illness and you're meant to learn through that illness. There is a map. There is a map, and there are some things that we have come to experience, to learn through, and we have our free will. Did the people back in Germany have free will? How much free will did they have? How much capacity did they have to choose? This is the question I ask. How much were they able to not allow tyranny to happen? This is a question. I do not have the answer for you, but I think it is a question worth holding in our hearts instead of simply saying every tyranny in history happened because people allowed it to happen. I say to you that we come in to this world to experience adversity, extreme adversity, painful childhood adversity, because what if souls came in to experience extreme persecution and adversity during the Third Reich, during the Nazi era? What if souls came in willingly to burn karma, to give themselves to a brutal crucible? I read in a book one time, I don't remember the name of the book, but there was a wonderful quote. It said, the deeper the mud, the taller the lotus. The deeper the mud, the taller the lotus. You know that. Of course you do. That's the wisdom of suffering. Because in our suffering, we go into new levels of heartbreak, new levels of compassion, new levels of depth, new levels of wisdom, new levels of grief. We access new parts of ourselves that we wouldn't have otherwise without that dark passage. Through giving ourselves, through planting ourselves deep in the mud, because that's a way to look at incarnation, is that we are coming in and we are planting ourselves deep in the mud. We are planting ourselves. We are coming in and we're planting ourselves into the mud by coming into this dark world. And sometimes we choose a very dark incarnation, which means we are going to plant ourselves deep in the mud, but in deep mud, we have the possibility to blossom to incredibly new heights, to heights that we wouldn't have. We can ascend, we can resurrect and ascend to new heights that we couldn't have if the mud was not that deep, not that thick, not that dark. So who are we to make up assumptions about what the purpose of a soul was during that time? One perspective is to see them as 100% victims. Another perspective is to see them as incredibly powerful, heroic souls that signed up for one hell of a transformative experience, for an experience that accelerates their soul ascension, their soul maturation. Who are we to relegate them simply to victim? Do you see how that can actually be not only disrespectful, but not aligned with actual truth? We are far more than victims. We are powerful souls. We are spiritual warriors. And it is the warrior spirit that says, I will choose that path, dark and disturbing as it'll be. But boy, am I going to grow through that. Boy, am I going to learn a lot. My heart is going to break, and I'm going to bow so deeply because of that. I'm going to bow so deeply in my heartbreak. And in bowing, I'm going to surrender to an entirely different level, because I will have no other option but to surrender, but to bow, because the weight of darkness is going to force that upon me. It is going to force a crucifixion. So it is high time we transcend this very simplistic story, this very limiting story, disrespectful story that says all tyranny has come about because people have allowed it to happen. Who are we to assume? So I wanted to give that to you. I felt a fierce fire in me that needed to share that. If you enjoy this video, and thank you for watching, please share, please like, please subscribe, please comment, and take good care.